left off here. Guess I could have done it all in one day. I just want to get too long-winded, you know? Gotta get a break in every now and then, you know what I'm saying? Are those even words? I don't know. We'll go quickly, though. We'll try to tear through this. We have many counties to go in this wide world. What we're told about this Meux home is that it's not historically significant from its association, but from the fact that it still exists. Not the largest nor the grandest, nevertheless unique for surviving in almost original condition and unaltered architectural style. Never redecorated, never remodeled, never used for anything other than a private home. Well, there was an office at one point. But Thomas Richard Meux, born in 1838 in Haywood County, Tennessee, graduates from the University of Pennsylvania Medical School at the age of 22, joins the Civil War, becomes a captain, participates in a few battles. After 4 years, he leaves as an assistant surgeon, marries Mary Davis, has a few kids, mom's in poor health, moves to San Francisco for good health, decides to settle in the Central Valley, and surveying the developing area, this is where he chose this corner. Expensive residence area, and this home is the only surviving residence on this major street of the old town. Then he established a medical practice and served the community as a physician his entire life. Entire life there, 91 years old when he passed away, and his daughter lived there for another 70 plus years. You know, for all the times we're told that life expectancy is so much shorter, so many people live to be 90 years old, it's starting to make me wonder about all that. But anyway, that's why the house is here, and if you look at it, it's just a beautiful home. Not a speck on it that is undecorated in the typical Victorian style, as you'll soon see. Wish I had more pictures of the bad boy, but nothing is unaltered, nothing has changed, and it's just absolutely splendid. Gotta love that. And imagine this is the only one of an entire neighborhood of these left. They do that everywhere, you know? Everywhere you go, there's one left. One. They just leave one to paint us, to tell us the story. It's not enough, damn it. And it's highly suspicious. Why one? Why not three? I don't know. Mix it up sometimes, you narrative-building jerks. Here's the very suspicious old water tower that we've seen earlier. The original one still stands in Fresno, the original water tower of the city. Now, as the story goes, it has a storage capacity of 250,000 gallons, constructed of ordinary red brick, each layer smaller than the one before it, to produce a beehive effect. Wall is 2 feet thick, and there is a passage of about 3 feet between the two walls. Really? That is interesting. The second floor is a very high ceiling, but it's only 2 stories, somehow. Anyway, 1891, George Mayer, the Chicago architect, was commissioned to design Fresno's water tower. The Great Chicago Fire having taken place 23 years earlier, Mr. Mayer had been impressed by 2 things in that year. First, the public library had burned to the ground. That is impressive. And second, the water tower had survived. Okay. It was used as a temporary city library as books began being replaced by various donors. Eventually, he thought highly of a library in the water tower. Wow. What a genius. Because his plans for the Fresno Tower were modeled after the Chicago Tower and included provision for the library. But fortunately for future library patrons, this part of his plan was never adopted because it's a stupid idea. The second floor of the tower was built, but the third level was never added, and the tower was in use since 1894, constant use until 1963 when the pumping machinery was no longer adequate. But the real value is now found in its graceful beauty and its otherworldly charm. I agree. And just look at that bad boy. One wonders about the battery here on the side, doesn't one? And what the original idea behind it was. Space in between, huh? Insulated layer, almost as if it were a piece of technology. I don't know. Just a thought. But what do I know? This is the old administration building here in Fresno State Normal School, which is what all the colleges were called at one point. Normal schools, where they would try to just literally train teachers. That was their stated mission. Not this one in particular, but normal schools in general. Made completely of brick. All the rooms have been repainted and stuff. Contains some of its original vibe. It's the only surviving complex remaining from the normal school. Oh God. Construction begins in the spring of 1915, and the building housing the old junior college was demolished, and now it's occupied by an automobile agency. It's the only remaining structure symbolizing the foundation of facilities of higher education in the San Joaquin Valley. The idea was that the normal school would provide agricultural and other industrial training, that normal schools ought not to graduate a teacher from it who has not had a complete work and manual training, who is not a capable cook, an exceptionally good seamstress, and doesn't know something of the practical work of agriculture. How far we've fallen. So the efforts of bringing a normal school to Fresno, which would pay special attention to agriculture and the training of teachers in agriculture. There's need for that kind of normal school, for there's no school now teaching teachers of that kind. And this was apparently the first normal school in California, and possibly in the entire west of the United States to offer agricultural training for teachers. And by 1914, that's exactly what they had. Classes on soils and crops and irrigation and fruits and garden crops and all sorts of other things. And they were attempting to place the basic industry of agriculture in the course of study for the West. Obviously, we have fallen far from that. I applaud your vision, sirs. There was a bunch of other campus campus facilities, and there was once a playhouse, which was a church then turned into a theater, and it was recently demolished, I guess in the 70s, and it was described in 1949 as one of the most complete theatrical centers to be found west of the Rocky Mountains. And still, we're just gonna we're gonna demolish it. Unbelievable. Fresno State Normal School gradually turned into Fresno State Teachers College, and then into Fresno State College, and into Fresno City College, and then California's scourge on our society. But that's just my own personal opinion. Look at that beauty. Covered in vines and everything. What an artsy shot, little surveyor. Wow. I wonder what was initially here. Probably a bunch of little rosettes. Gradually, one by one, broken off or pilfered by the normal students, I suppose. Alexander Pantage's theater, designed by theater architect Marcus Pritieka, are basically refinements of early theaters, which provided for maximum flexibility. That's what we're told, anyway. Eclectic blends with terracotta entablature, rusticated octagonal tower, and classic ornamentation sets this theater apart from its modern contemporaries. Unlike Europe, so few of the structures built decades ago and devoted to cultural advancement here in the United States are preserved for the future. At one point, there was an artist performing here, and he stopped during his act and urged the audience to take care of the building and not let it be leveled like the Fox Theater in San Francisco where he lived. This unnamed artist is the most important sentiment in registering the building. A surviving example of the vaudeville era, span of only 20 years, but touched the lives of people from the metropolitan cities to the smallest of farm towns. Vaudeville was a highly developed entertainment. Comedians, singers, jugglers, performers who achieved distinction as actors in comedy and farce and musicals and even tragedy. And they learned how to catch the attention of an audience and how to pace themselves, and their stars formed a pool of talent from which the new mediums of radio and television drank thirstily. Alexander Pantages, one of the more prominent managers of vaudeville, was the theater magnate who constructed this theater, helping to set the tempo and the tone of vaudeville. He was an immigrant from Greece. He came to the U.S. and spent time in the Yukon. We're told, a legend tells us, that Klondike Kate loaned him $24 to start a saloon. No relation to Big Nose Kate of Tombstone from the other part of the world. There's a Kate that owns a saloon everywhere, apparently. The money he earned working as a bartender and providing entertainment for the miners was brought back to Seattle, and he bought his first theater. And before he retired, he had controlled 40 and owned 16 theaters. And all of them were designed by the same architect, B. Marcus Pritieka. How about that? Those two men came to Fresno when it was still a desert, and invested money in one of the finest of the 17 theaters they built. He was known as a fine man to work for, one who commanded loyalty, an absolutely square and true friend. His word was bond. Mr. Architect is what Mr. Benjamin Marcus Pritieka is known as. What a great nickname. Also known as Uncle Benny. But many regard him to be one of the great theater architects in the country. Well, I guess if you make 50 or 60 theaters, they look like this. He was raised in Scotland. He left his home at an early age, moved to Seattle after becoming an architect, and he stayed there until he died at the age of 81. He designed 220 theaters, from Canada, Vancouver, to LA, to Memphis, Tennessee. Orpheums and Coliseums and the Palomar and Paramount Theaters, a place where the Academy Awards was held for years. He designed a body for a locomotive automobile. He worked on racetracks. Other individuals associated with this theater were the Warner Brothers. Interesting. Who purchased the theater a year after it opened and operated until the 60s. They chose Fresno as the second city on the entire coast in which to establish a Warner Brothers theater. Interesting. So when they bought it, 1 year after it opened, they changed the name to Warner's, and then they changed the E in Warner's to an O in the 60s for some reason. Very interesting. Warner Brothers opened the theater on the third anniversary of Vitaphone, the pioneer talking and singing motion picture system launched by them in 1926, and they staged one of the most elaborate of their premiere showings here. They also brought CinemaScope to the screen, a three-dimensional film process which was installed here in the early 60s. Well, another product of the dignity and worth of the Fresno Warners is the unique installation of the House Theater pipe organ built by Morgan Organ Company of California. It was the last one built by the company. Four-board console contains 720 keys, pedals, and combination pistons. Only a few of its kind were ever made. There was a duplicate organ, but it burned in the LA theater in which it was housed, of course. The organ has been used intermittently over the years. For a while, it was used for late-night radio shows. It was also used during intermission at the movies. In the worldwide, we're told that there are only about 400 pipe organs which still remain of the 8,000 that once existed. And even as far as the 70s, there are fewer and fewer theaters who want to bear the expense of maintaining an organ. Warner's Theater is very much part of downtown Fresno. We saw a little peek at it earlier, but now you see it for yourself here. An absolutely out of place, an old world marvel. And there's one like it in every city. And I suspect it once played a larger role in our society than mere entertainment. Look how stunning. My lands. What a completely beautiful building. A real slice at a time. Imagine just going to the desert to build this. Yeah, right. Selling it after 1 year. You build this thing and design this, you're going to sell it after 1 year? Get the fuck out of here. We'll buy that for a minute. They're in on it from the beginning. Or they never owned it. Or they never built it. I mean, why would you build this and then just immediately sell it a year later? Like, I guess so. Yeah, we'll sell it. Yeah, we don't really care. Oh, this is a proof, huh? Scaffolding built around an already constructed building. Well, how about that? I guess that's the proof. This obviously pasted in picture here. Is that how buildings work? Sure. The Physicians Building. At the time, it was over 1,000 square feet, 28 different rooms, an octagonal fountain and a fish pond. Built at the edge of town. Now, although several early sources showed promise of turning up original plans and or drawings of the building, at least 2 sets of records are known to have been permanently destroyed. It was built in 1926 for 6 Fresno physicians and surgeons who formed a partnership to share in not only the construction of the medical complex, but it would establish a clinic for group practice. An intriguing alliance. A variety of professional specialties, surgery, pediatrics, internal medicine, and no doubt they referred each other to each other constantly. Rather interesting building. You know, the physicians of today just prefer clinical white walls and places that make you feel like you're insane. I find it odd that these guys valued goldfish ponds and soothing water and things like that. Charles E. Butner was the architect, the same gentleman we saw earlier who designed the Republican Printing Company, along with Edward Glass. A troubling number of Charles Butner's distinctive buildings have been destroyed, and this one is probably the most notable. And I would say, of the 2 that I've seen, this one is the better one, even though it's clearly in the state of disrepair. Drop-down acoustic tiles are maybe the worst paneling ever, designed to slowly stifle you and kill you. That's my hot take.
The 1889 Southern Pacific Passenger Depot, located in downtown Fresno, is an unusual departure, we are told, from the traditional Southern Pacific architectural style because the citizens in 1888 rejected the original plans, which may explain why it wasn't constructed in the rectangular box style prevalent throughout the rest of San Joaquin Valley. Maybe. So instead, they decided to replace the small, already rectangular box style wooden structure which had already been serving the community since 1872, as reported by the Daily Evening Expositor, January 23rd, 1889. The building will be both handsome and commodious, being of the Queen Anne style of architecture. It was made entirely of brick. Queen Anne style, of course. That's exactly how most train passenger depots should look, right? Complete with the bell tower and all that. It's all very necessary. Brick detailing and all cornices and the turrets. In any case, there's very little reference material available at any of the sources, the Historical Society, the Wells Fargo, or the Southern Pacific Railroad Company. Shockingly impossible to obtain the date of the first and major edition, which was sometime between 1914 and 1930. And the only recorded editions or alterations were shockingly when a fire damaged the upstairs. Unbelievable. Only the fire was noted. Well, note this, I'd say. Leland Stanford, one of the big 4 of Central Pacific, saw the Banner Ranch in November in 1871 for the first time. Here he gasped at what had once been a dry desert plain. Suddenly was replaced with 2,000 acres of green, lush grain. Water had been brought to the area by Moses Church, as we've learned, through a system of canals from the Kings River miles away. And as commented on by local historian Paul Vandor, this is a forlorn spot. Why, prior to this, one could journey 20 miles or more in any direction without so much as finding a bush large enough to cut a horse switch. And of course we believed this, just like when they told us that this area was completely unpeopled, except for, well, those pesky people. So no doubt this is just as honest. But we are told Stanford, who was overwhelmed by the accomplishment and the potential, said, "Here we must locate the town." This was the birth of the city of Fresno. April 18th, 1872, a mere 5 months later, if you're keeping track, is what established this Fresno station on the sinks of Dry Creek, which sounds like a great place to begin building a railroad station. And because of this, the community began to grow. The venture proved rewarding. All possible through the instrumentality of the Southern Pacific Railroad, we are assured, which transformed San Joaquin Valley life. Thank God for Leland Stanford. Poor Millerton. In 1874, Fresno County residents voted to move the county seat to the city of Fresno, and they said the following, quote, "Neener, neener," end quote. However, by 1889, which is a mere, 15 years, the Southern Pacific removed the 1872 depot and replaced it with a new spacious passenger one, as you see here before you. today. And just look at that friggin' beauty. First of all, the quality of photography is just to be absolutely ridiculed. And that's how you know they built it. That sign right there, that little digital sign hanging there from the one window. The photographer honestly ought to be brought out back and possibly beaten within an inch of his life for even submitting these to an official historical society. What is this? You get barely a glimpse of the tower back here? What a friggin' joke. That's right, I'm talking to you, whoever took the pictures. If that is your real name. Sowers, get the Tower Theater! Ha-ha! You thought I was going to stop there. No, you didn't. Let me just tell you a little bit about this here building, okay? And then we can discuss who said what, when, and where. Because the Tower, also known as the Tower Theater, located in what's known as the Tower District, which is a neighborhood suburban shopping area named after the Tower Theater. It opened its doors to the film viewing public, who are no doubt giddy with excitement, on December 15th, 1939. The double feature program included The Dancing Co-Ed and the more mildly titled Henry Goes Arizona. I don't know if that's a play off of Debbie Does Dallas. I don't know. My research didn't extend beyond the title. Thanks, I do have class. Now, what we're told is it's a representative example of the late 1930s suburban theaters by S. Charles Lee, who lived to be 91 years old, and is the only completed work of his in Fresno. However, he did design over 400 theaters, actively between the years of 1922 and 1950. In a mere 28 years, he was an acknowledged master of Art Deco. A high-profile private sector venture, and during the late Depression, the tower was reviewed in professional journals upon completion, trust us, and it was rushed into occupancy. So many things built during the Depression, it's strange. You would think such opulent buildings wouldn't be anywhere on the radar, but nar. The building was constructed for Fox West Coast theaters, as we've heard time after time after time, and much of the buildings were demolished, the buildings that were built in this era. In 1937 to 1942, the Fresno streamlined modern-style commercial building period, about half the buildings were destroyed in the area, which we've seen. And in fact, only a few things, such as the neon marquee, interior ornamentation, and illuminated spike tower were saved here. It's always a foreign-born muralist that's credited with the art. I just want to point that out. It's never a local guy. It's always some guy that they shipped here. And in this case, it's Dutch-born muralist Anthony Heinsbergen. And at the point of the submission to the historical record, this is one of 6 surviving vintage theaters standing in Fresno. Hopefully this means it's still there today. So 6 surviving vintage theaters in Fresno alone. One wonders how many vintage theaters there were. If there's only 6 left, well, that kind of language sounds like there's a lot going on in Fresno. But we're told it's structurally sound and exhibits a high degree of architectural integrity and been in use since 1939. Now, we're told about the architect that he studied at Chicago Technical College and the Armour Institute of Technology. While a young man working for Rap and Rap, a highly regarded Chicago rap group and architectural firm on the side, he became interested in theater design, and in 1922, at the very ripe age of 23, he settled in Los Angeles, and the Tower Theater in Los Angeles was his first building. Amazing! Whip up a Spanish Romanesque Moorish design as your first building, launching a career that would make him the principal designer of motion picture theaters during the 30s and 40s. Deeper look at this Mr. Lee would connect him to a very prestigious group of elite family members, but I'll refrain at this point from allowing myself to make the sidetrack here, which will inevitably lead me into the depths of despair. The muralist, who also immigrated to Los Angeles in 1906 from Holland, received his very first major theater commission from Alexander Pantages in 1924, and he decorated over 750 theaters nationwide. He was most proud of his classically inspired murals for the Orpheum Theater in Vancouver. But, Byzantine sumptuousness and Art Deco cubism and pure kitsch, perfect for the timeless and vulgar opulence of moviegoers, wouldn't you say? Now, when the Tower Theater opened in 1939, its one distinct advantage was its on-site parking lot. Fascinating. Here's a dazzling photograph, but that's nothing to do with this theater at all. Here's a alleged drawing that the architect did just one day while perched in the water closet. Tower, it says, and tower it is. And here it is, folks, the Tower Theater. If that just don't scream old world symbolism, then I don't know what does. It reminds me of the old photographs of the Wizard of Oz, Emerald City, that I saw in books from back in my yesteryear. Your yesteryear too, you know. Yes, I see. Very modern. Mythology. A beautiful building. A perplexing tower. And a very lovely little quaint awning. I love these old fonts, and I just love this era of Americana. It's so cool. But I very much doubt these backstories. I mean, I just don't get it. What were these theaters used for, I wonder? It is a random picture of a pizza parlor that really has nothing to do with anything. But there it is. And there's where you'll be throwing up after you drink too much. Right in there. That's right. Give you a little privacy. You'll be laying in the gravel face down until someone kicks you and says, "Hey, you want it inside. Boss is looking for you." Hopefully that doesn't happen to you. Not that it ever happened to me or anything. Look, let's move on. What's done is done. Stoner residence and or stoner mansion. Which is funny because there's always a stone or stoner on just about every county, it seems like, list. But this one was built in 1910. A notable local example of the bungalow style. Of course, a stoner would live in a bungalow. And this is what is referred to as by the residents of the area, occupied by Bertrand L. Stoner and Cornelia Kitty Stoner, who were prominent members of the community. Kitty Stoner, eh? Why do I feel like she dates someone that looks like Peter Frampton? Anyway, there were other people that were involved with the occupation of this here thermal tract, which is a high-quality, rich clay, loam soil agricultural area, which was free from frost damage. And the skill level of the type of person attracted to this valley was high enough as to create a very high crop quality, productivity, and also very high angle of nose held. Jefferson James Graves was such a figure. The grandson of Jefferson Gilbert James, cattle king, whose role goes back to 1863 when he bought his first 640 acres from the state for $1 per acre, and his court battles with Henry Miller established much of the state water rights laws. Jefferson was a bastard. That's my edit. Known as an agriculturist and racehorse breeder, his brother Jim Graves of the Graves brothers was the guy who purchased, developed irrigation systems, and offered settlers acreages of rich tillable land tracts of the most beautiful body of land in all of Fresno County. Promoting the Kings River Thermal Tract and making a fortune, his posse included attorneys Milton Deering and H.A. Savage. They developed high-quality fruit farms. Now, Miss Kitty Stoner, her husband Bertrand, stockholders both from Chicago, Illinois, just couldn't write enough praise about the Emperor grape vineyard that they planted. Stoner's oranges were described as the finest in sugar color and texture north of the Tehachapi Mountains. Bertrand further exclaims, "My water supply is abundant. The natural scenic beauty of the surroundings, coupled with returns, indicated financially determined me in making the Kings River Thermal Tract my permanent home." Yes, these are the very types of things that people like to write. How believable. And here be the Stoner Mansion today. Right there, you can just see it. Just look at her there. A prime example of the old California bungalow. Just look at them heaps of chopped firewoods. Just you look at them heaps. Witness the prickly pear. Look how happy. What is that, a barn? That's a barn. A beautiful little home. Not sure if that's carpet or some sort of a ecosystem. Maybe both. A carpeted bathroom. Yeesh. And these are the heads of the naysayers who came before me and also declared this story to be bunk. There, but for the grace of God, go I. The Rehorn residence, or Rehorn? Whatever. Two-story, characteristically Georgian revival, that's what we're told. Full basement, of course. 4,000 square foot, 16-room house. Good golly whizackles. Made of pale gray Antioch sand brick. And, quite the, looker. Colonial in design and all that. Woodwork and ivory white and the walls of a delicate creamy tent. And the home originally belonged to Frank Rehorn, and it was sold to HHH, where the third H stands for Holland, who hired our old friends, architects Glass and Butner, to remodel it in 1919. The original construction date was, well, we'll get there. But this is an exclusive area of town called the Cathedral District, which was once fashionable, meaning no longer fashionable. And this was about 6 blocks northeast of the aforelooked-at Fresno County Courthouse. Mr. Rehorn was a pioneer building contractor who lived from 1862 until 1916. who figured heavily in the growth of the Fresno from its early days as a shack town to its emergence as the Joaquin Valley's first high-rise city. He was an outspoken member of the Citizens Alliance, a well-known gavel smacker, I assume, as the first president of the Builders Exchange. And these organizations were born out of the anti-union sentiment. And this house, indeed, was at the center of no less than 3 well-publicized strikes and took well over 12 months to complete due to delays inflicted by union pickets and their dastardly picket signs. He was not a popular man within union circles because of his commitment to the open shop concept. He was vocally involved and physically involved in street brawls, political oratories, and mass jailings, which were common news in the community, and he was much quoted, giving him, in my mind, much suspicion. The original architect, Mr. Alexander Swartz, made his way to California shortly after Mr. Rehorn had relocated to Fresno at the age of 25. Both came from Kansas, where they were involved in the building trades, while Swartz was associated with the railroad. And he was educated, despite being from Kansas, at the University of Illinois, with a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering at the age of 27. He then remained for the next 4 years at the university as a faculty member and left academia in order to involve himself in a more challenging application of his professional skills. He was summoned from Kansas in 1890 to survey and design the much-heralded Pacheco Pass Railroad route. The project came to a halt when the president suddenly died. That's the president of the railroad company anyways. Not the president of the U.S. He probably suddenly died too. Probably from an overdose of milk and cherries or something. But on 1/16/1906, Frank Rehorn and his wife Myrtle held a housewarming affair for a small gathering of close friends, and among those present was A.C. Swartz. Weird. Somehow close friends somehow. The builder and the architect. A appearance which was prestigious and immediately highlighted by local papers as yet another sign of young Fresno's awakening cultural sophistication. This reeks to Mob Ryan of deep state, or however you want to call our hidden hand enemy, narration manipulation. Now, the area has now been overrun by modern medical offices and laboratories which compete for choice locations, being a block away from the sprawling Fresno Community Hospital. And many of them, such as the Charles Lindgren residence, were leveled, many of their ornate front porticos stripped away forever, and only the Rehorn home stands as a graphic remnant in a neighborhood which apparently once boasted a collection of grand residences. So behold the former glory of what was, now never to be again. Feast your eyes upon what you have lost, America. Do it. Just look at it. And it is beautiful. I mean, cynical and sardonic tone aside, a deep sigh, which I will reluctantly admit and emit, really does tell the tale of my broken heart as to the once amazing, well, maybe not from this angle. This looks sort of hodgepodge together. But let's look at that winding rope. Gorgeous baluster. Man, look at that. Oh, man, lathe work. Unparalleled. And look at this guy. This is your educational video, not mine. That's 100% not true. I'm assuming it's Mr. Rehorn. Frank. Good old Frankie Ree. Frank the Horn, they maybe called him. There's the Santa Fe Hotel, which is just a 2-story brick building, and it's barely a hotel. We're told if you swing open the singular heavy oak door, you're struck by the beauty and workmanship of the bar, which is over 125 years old. Not to mention the liquor selection, which is over 125 years old perhaps as well. The richly engraved red oak and mahogany pillars, we are told, support wood trim, which is adorned with richly hand-carved designs, heavy brass chandeliers, And the flooring has a mirror shine to the linoleum, which was laid over the original concrete flooring in recent years. You don't say. There was 1-inch tile, octagon, which was damaged and irreplaceable when it became necessary to tunnel through the floor to repair underground plumbing, is what we are told. But these are just little cherry-picked quotes from the construction notes. In reality, it's a Basque hotel, which seems truly out of place in the downtown area of Fresno, with its old world customs, which date back to the first beginnings of the 1920s. But it's a favorite dining spot for hundreds of visitors, and we're told the Basque sheepherders who have retired and reside there today wouldn't trade it even for the Trump Tower. An important social institution, we are told, one of the oldest and most important ethnic institutions found among the Basques of Fresno. Originally, it was a first way station for the newly arrived immigrant, a haven for the unemployed, employed, a base of operations for the sheepmen in town on business. Sheepmen in need of herders usually began their search here. It was the closest thing that the nomadic Basque sheepherder had to a home. It was his mailing address. The hotel keepers would save the letters for many months if need be. It was the place where the nomadic Basque sheepherder would leave his bedroll and rifle when in town, and his good town clothing. And there was a special storeroom built for such items, and here in the storeroom there have been as many as 100 bedrolls stored carefully, despite the fact that some of their owners have not been heard from in over 20 years. In fact, recent inspection found rodents had found their way into some of the bedrolls, and all except the ones with tags were disposed of. For the man who's either injured or ill, this hotel served as a clinic where he could recuperate. It was common for Basque women living on isolated ranches to board here during the latter stages of pregnancy. The baby was born in the hotel, and the hotel keeper's wife frequently served as the midwife. And as a Basque child living in an isolated ranch entered his school years, he might be boarded during the school term at the Santa Fe. So this functioned as an old age home. It acquired a population of retired bachelor herders who preferred to live out their life in the U.S. rather than return to the old country. In some cases, its function as a funeral parlor, where a corpse might spend its last night before interment. One of the real secrets of success was the proprietor's ability to become a confidant in the delicate areas of financial affairs, legal matters, and general dealings with the Anglo world. Since the Basque sheepherder tended to be a person of, shall we say, limited educational background, and also tended to be a person where they didn't actually speak English. So you kind of need that to understand American society. Thus, he was sorely unprepared to deal with the local banker, lawyer, doctor, or merchant. In all of these areas, the hotel keeper could be counted on, in good faith, to serve the herder as both interpreter and protector of his interests. So therefore, since the Basque/American/sheepherder way of life has become extinct like the dodo, the last 30 years, this Santa Fe hotel has acquired a considerable non-Basque tourist trade. It advertises but little, but there are many devotees of the cuisine and atmosphere who make a point of discovering and frequenting the Santa Fe because of the hearty, ample, and inexpensive fare. Although this information comes from about 40 years ago, so it's probably no longer inexpensive, and there's probably no longer the camaraderie of eating meals family style at a long table. I don't know. But the old world atmosphere where questions concerning the mystery of the Basques may be directed at the no doubt uninformed bartender. That's why this is listed on here as an ethnic haven for the old world herder. And while built in 1926, the original one was actually built before 1900. It was called the Fresno Hotel. 20 years later, when the new one was built, the old one was condemned after 20 years and torn down. Ridiculous. 20 years. Condemned. It used to be called the Sheep Camp Hotel. And also there were many television documentaries of Armenians, first arrivals by train, who were quoted as saying, "We will meet you at Martin's place," which referred to the proprietor of the hotel, whose name was Martin. So there you have it. There's the narrative behind the Santa Fe Hotel. And here is the hotel as she looked some time ago. And this here is a Basque sheepherder, perhaps, or maybe this is Martin himself, leaning on a fake bit of foam in front of a windswept fake background with what looks to be a pasted-on hat. I don't know. Not sure where his other hand is either. I guess it could be curled behind him. Looks kind of a silly photo to me. Plus, he's like 20 years old. But no doubt, there is some truth to the history behind said building, and I am wondering why in the entire history that we looked at earlier, there was no mention of these Basque sheepherders, but apparently they played a prevalent role. Now, that is a really dope bar, I will say, and I'm often suspicious of these. They often look like they're taken from buildings. There's some of these in, like, Tombstone, Arizona. It's this massive wooden mantle, ornate and heavily carved, and they claim it's been there for 150 years or whatever. Not just Tombstone, but a lot of western towns. And they just look to me like, I mean, if they originally were part of a bar, well, I don't know. They just look out of place to more Brian. But yeah, no doubt it must be fun to pony up to the bar here and say, "What news from the north?" Wagon wheel, chandelier, looks like a prop. "Oh, the old Basque sheepherder boy. Here we are, dude, just herding sheep, dude." What the hell is this photograph? I'm not doubting the existence of sheepherders, but these guys look two-dimensional, like cardboard cutouts. What a crappy photo. That proves nothing. Why even include that? That looks like faker than the frick. Look, it's friggin' faker than a $9 bill. Just don't know why there's such crappy photos. What weird photographs. This is the big, long communal table they're talking about? I don't know, dude. I'm not trying to disparage the culture and the history. I'm sure it's there, and I'm sure it's greater than that. But it just seems odd, all this. Oh, these are the old bedrolls that have been here for hundreds of years, huh? Sure. What a cool story with such a weak photographic supporting evidence. The Frank Romain house. Closely associated for some 75 years with individuals who have made significant contributions to the city of Fresno with the San Joaquin Valley and the state of California. Woo! School, constructed for Frank Romain in 1905, who was one of the pioneering developers of agricultural history in the central San Joaquin Valley. He established the packing plant, known as the Griffin Skelly Packing Plant, in the Central California colony just outside of Fresno. And according to one later account who's familiar with the situation, this is the first, or one of the first, packing companies in the district. The erection of his fine residence in 1905 is an indication and proof of the success of his early efforts and his position of responsibility in the development of the local economy, as you can clearly tell. When the Griffin plant was merged with others 10 years later to become the California Packing Corporation, why, Mr. Romain was the manager responsible for the corporation's operations, and by 1923, this included supervision of 16 packing houses, several thousand employees. He died a few years later, and the new owners utilized the residence as a funeral home. Wow, you die and they turn your house into a funeral home? That sucks. We're told one partner died, one withdrew, and the residence nevertheless functioned as the Sylvan Burns and Blair Funeral Home for the next 30 years. Mr. Burns, the survivor, was a prominent member of the California legislature, where he served as the second longest record of continuous service until 1970 from 1936. So, state legislature alumni, and that's why it's known, all right, in the area. Okay, Mr. Romain graduated from business school, worked for the railroad, like all good up-and-coming deep state D-bags, and then moved to Riverside, where he became he acquired a modest position within the Griffin Skelly Company. But within 1 year, he was in charge of the entire plant. That's so believable. I often get jobs where after 1 year, I'm suddenly in charge of the entire job. How easy it all must have been. His responsibilities increased just a few years later. Suddenly, they merged with the California canneries and the fruit canners and the Alaska packers, and they had the California Packing Corporation with assets of over $16 million, operating hundreds of canneries and packing plants in 5 different states. Widely respected for his role in the development of the packing industry, he was also active in the community, being high in the councils of the Republican Party, member of the Odd Fellows, the Elks, the Sequoia Club, and the Commercial Club, and one of the 4 original promoters of the Sunnyside Club. In short, he was a member of several deep, seedy societies. And so witness the fruits of such shady labor in this amazing photograph taken from across the street. I don't know why. They're scared of trespassing or what? This is where he lived. This is where the funeral home is. Just look at it. And why would you save this out of the hundreds of houses that are in Fresno that are just beautiful if you've ever been in the area? Oh, I don't know. Just because it tells a story about packing and industry and stuff, and that's all we really care about. F your architecture. We only care about the narrative, dude. That's what this is all about. I was really hoping, like I do with all these districts, to find some really interesting history. And yeah, it's watered down. It's still kind of interesting, but what the bleep? I don't care about your stories, you liars. This is the 1903 Reedley Opera House complex, one of the finest examples of turn-of-the-century brick commercial architecture in the local community, which we've been told time after time. And after a fire destroyed downtown Reedley, it was designed and built by Jesse Jansen, an important local entrepreneur. Not only contained a theater, but it also included the town's major banking facility. How convenient. It's almost as if the theater and the bank are in cahoots, which fits in perfectly with my predetermined worldview. Audience capacity of over 300. Yeah. Mr. Jansen was a native of Denmark, born in the 1850s that is. He followed the sea until he reached a captain's rank. So another sea captain. Shocking. The sea captain that left it all for the land of promise, the gold country, in Placer County, settled into farming. Well, right, from sea captain into farming, which naturally leads you to being a grain agent and then a real estate and insurance business magnate, which he was. And then in 1902, a fire burned all all wooden structures except for one brick structure. So Mr. Jansen bought the brick from this damaged building and began the construction of his building. Why would the other building that didn't burn down be like, yeah, you can dismantle this now? But whatever, he organized the merchants to rebuild with the same brick. The paper has the following account. The rebuilding of the old brick store was a doubtful proposition for some time after the fire, but that public-spirited citizen, Jesse Jansen, came to the rescue by purchasing the lots and erecting the Opera House block. Sea captain, grain magnate, real estate, insurance, and now architect? Good gollywockles. Mr. Jansen, you're a modern-day Superman. He also put in the waterworks for the downtown area. Then, in 1913, when the city was incorporated, it bought out his waterworks and added the new city hall next to the Opera House. Amazing! And this was, of course, until 1912, which the silent movies entered the scene, with a traveling company doing Uncle Tom's Cabin. Another bit of propaganda. theater. And there was operettas and community plays and recitations, no doubt, political speeches, grand balls, square dances, dance and piano recitals, no doubt, band concerts, town meetings, boxing and wrestling exhibitions. The churches held revivals there. The Catholic Church used it every Sunday for 4 years, because of course the church and the theater and the bank are all, they're all part of the same hydra, according to me. And the Catholic Church, actually, priests heard confessions out of the same booth used for ticket sales. Okay, I'm done. Witness the church/confessional booth/bank/opera house. Constructed by the Dutch sea captain, crane magnate, industry, real estate agent, banker, builder, architect. Get these hay wagons out of the way. What the hell's that got to do with anything? What a contrived photograph. Let's park these here hay wagons right there in front of that there building there. That'll prove right now what day and age it is. Here stand I, hay vendor of the future. Get the frick out of here, dude. Why is all of this like a history is just a bad photo shoot? Time after time after time again. Now, the Reedley National Bank, which is also oddly known as the old Bank of America building. Really? You don't say. I thought Bank of America came out of the, what's it called? Bank of Italy. Let's find out. Ah, it is the Bank of Italy. The architect, Mr. Ernest J. Kump Sr. We know that name. Most of his buildings were torn down because of redevelopment and the Field Act. But Mr. Kump designed many, allegedly. Oh, he's got a son now, Ernest J. Kump Jr. Wow. That's so convenient when you have a historical narrative that assigns the same architect to like buildings hundreds of years apart, that you just had a junior on the name. Just saying. Seen a lot of that. And Ernest Kump Jr., who based his non-ornamented schools off the finger plan. I get your finger right here. And his buildings were very contemporary compared to his father's work, of course. Originally, there were two local banks. One that was in the aforementioned Opera House, and then this one, because, the bank's gotta have more than one building. And any building that looks like this, any temple with this sort of, idol, or whatever it is on the top there, this little Phoenician logo. Well, it's gotta be a bank or a post office. The terms are interchangeable. It doesn't matter. See? Doesn't matter. Whichever you need. You need a post office? Okay, it's done. Unbelievable. What is that, a giant nickel? Get me a crowbar. Take that one to the friggin'. The smithery. The foundry. Like a sword made out of this giant nickel, please. And just look at the same symbolism everywhere you go. All across California, especially. That little swastika. We're gonna pretend like it's something else, but we know what's going on. This is the Twining Laboratory. And actually, it was built in 1930 as a chemical testing lab. And while it is on the historical building survey built by our old friends Butner and Glass, I simply don't see the story as being very interesting at all. So, aside from these amazing cars, which I would literally murder a man to get my hands on. Do you hear that, America? Murder. I don't see much left. The narrative is not very compelling, so we're going to skip it. But the architecture, on the other hand, belies something much older. Could be a train station. Nope, it's a laboratory. I mean, all those bakers definitely speak to it as a, hey, wear gloves, lady. You're going to turn into a frog. Maybe that stuff spills on you. Just act natural, okay? When you take some photographs, make sure you leave lots of bottles of bleach and some wine glasses around. I mean, I don't doubt it was a lab, and I'm sure important stuff went down there. Now we're going to look at this YWCA building here, which is noteworthy because it was designed by Julia Morgan, one of the only women architects in America at this time, and the foremost, and it fulfilled its purpose of providing moderate cost housing for women for more than 55 years. She was the official architect in the West, and very involved in, of course, all of the World's Fairs, which makes her very suspicious. Born in San Francisco, Miss Morgan became an architect when very few women, as I mentioned, entered the profession. She met Bernard Maybach, then an instructor of drawing, and attended informal classes conducted at his home. Oh, really? A little private tutor session there. How about that? And encouraged by Mr. Maybach and her family, she continued to receive her studies at the Beaux-Arts in Paris, and in 1901 became the first woman to receive its diploma. She immediately found work with deep state agent John Galen Howard, who designed pretty much all of Berkeley, and recently moved his prosperous New York office to San Francisco to implement a grandiose plan for the aforementioned Berkeley campus. Wow, it's like I read all this stuff before, which I did back when we did Alameda County, remember? If you guys don't remember, then you should go back and watch it, okay? It's probably just as weird as this one. And of course, after the San Francisco earthquake and fire, she helped design many homes when its population was growing rapidly, and she also helped design Hearst Castle, which was probably her most spectacular job, allegedly. Anyway, this was opened in 1924, and here it is. Is it remarkable? No. Is it old? Yes. Does it tell a story? I guess. I mean, that's it. That's all you get. 2 bad pictures. So this is really just an excuse to mention that Julie Morgan is attached to the WYCA. As usual, narrative building and lack of substance. And finally, we have the San Joaquin Light and Power Corporation building, which was built between 1923 and 1924. In just 1 year is all it took to make this 10-story building, which also has a full basement. And this building provided electricity to 7 counties and also supplied the electrical current distributed in Monterey, Slowtown, and Santa Barbara. 1895 is where the company got its start. Mr. R.F. Felchlin, who held their offices in the Bank of Italy building, next to the bank. I wonder if they're in cahoots. And many of the buildings that we looked at already were associated with Mr. Felchlin and his rather dubious company. And here you have it, the Trade Center. The 10-story, easy to whip up in just a year or so. Ho-hum. Right next to this absolutely fantastic theater, which looks like it's a slice out of literally medieval times. Could be in Istanbul. And then, of course, we're going to cover it with modern murals, which I'm not against, but why? When the building looks this absolutely incredible. Why are you going to cover it with crappy murals? Look at these sconces. What a gorgeous place. Absolutely incredible. Built within a year, 10-story building. Get the bleep out of my inbox with that nonsense. I mean, look at these marble elevator doors. Incredible. Good God. This is just for a Light and Power Corporation building? These columns? What an absolute joke. Look how gorgeous this building is. The fact that they would tell you this was built within a year is an absolute insult. Incredible. I wonder what the ceiling actually looks like above these drop-down acoustic tiles, which really hurt my soul. Explain to me how this has any bearing, has anything to do with a corporation building. What is this? What an absolute joke. There it is, folks. There it is. The old picture, complete with, just look at that. What a fine photography we have here. There's a drawing after the fact. We're gonna make it look like this. Meaning it already looks like this. Incredible. What a beauty. And Fresno was probably once one of the most beautiful cities in California, from what I can tell. At the conclusion of this rather frustrating traipse through the National Registry of Historic Places, I come to the conclusion that, as I come to with many of these California counties, so much demolished, so much lost, and hurts my heart. I know I look at these with a sarcastic tone and I sort of mock the narrative, but how can you not? When they act as if everything was built by the same 7 people and the only thing that matters is something that represents a person that used to live here. Like, for example, it's a big farm industry. Well, we're going to designate one property to represent all farmers. We're going to name it this after this one farmer. It's weak. It doesn't paint a complete picture. It leaves much to be desired. But that's why we do this. And we'll be back with more California and more counties and more shaking our fists at the powers that be, whether in futility or not. Concerned but powerless, perhaps? Either way, I'll see you soon.